Mei Lin's knees hit the dirt before she could stop them. 3 days without food. The July sun hammering down on Harrow Creek like it had a personal grudge. She pressed her palms flat against the scorching ground outside the diner and tried to push herself back up, but her arms had nothing left. Through the haze of heat and hunger, she heard boots stop directly in front of her. Not the sound of someone walking past, the sound of someone who wasn't going to. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that summer dust in Harrow Creek, Texas, and meet a girl the whole town had already decided didn't matter. Mei Lin's knees hit the dirt before she could stop them. 3 days. That was how long she had gone without a real meal. Not a full day's worth of food, a real meal. The kind where you sit down and eat until the hollow feeling in your stomach stops screaming at you. 3 days of scraps. 3 days of creek water and half a tin of crackers she'd found abandoned on a fence post outside of Lubbock. 3 days of walking the cracked highway shoulders of West Texas in the full fury of a July that showed no mercy to anyone. Least of all a 20-year-old Chinese girl with no English beyond what she'd taught herself from a battered dictionary and no name in this country except the one she'd been brought over with. She pressed her palms flat against the burning ground outside Hattie's roadside diner and tried to push herself upright. Her arms trembled. Her vision pulled sideways. The smell coming through that screen door, grease and coffee, and something sweet, something that might have been pie, hit her so hard she nearly put her face back down in the dust and gave up entirely. She didn't give up. She'd stopped letting herself do that somewhere back in the panhandle. She got one knee under her, then the other. And she was almost standing when the screen door swung open, and a man in a white apron stepped out and looked at her the way a person looks at something they need to move before the customers notice it. "You again," he said. Mei Lin straightened. She pulled her braid over one shoulder and lifted her chin. "Please," she said. It was the word she'd learned to lead with. "Please, work. I work. Kitchen. Anything." The man Roy Hattie, who owned the diner, and believed very strongly in the right of any business owner to decide who stood in front of his establishment, crossed his arms and shook his head slowly. "Told you yesterday, told you the day before. We don't need kitchen help. We don't need any kind of help. And I can't have you sitting out here bothering my customers." "I not bother," Mei Lin said carefully. "I only ask. I ask one time. If no, I go." "You asked 3 times," Roy said. "This is 3. "Please," she said again, and she hated the way her voice cracked on it. She hated it more than the hunger and more than the heat. "I can clean. I can wash. I carry. Please." Roy Hattie looked at her for a long moment. His expression wasn't cruel exactly. It was the expression of a man who had decided that her situation wasn't his problem and had made that peace with himself a long time ago. "I'm sorry, miss, but you need to move along." He held the door open and called back inside. "Earl, bring me the broom, would you?" Mei Lin turned away before the broom came out. She wouldn't give him the sight of her being swept from his steps like dirt. She walked to the edge of the gravel lot and stopped there because stopping was all she had left. Her legs were done carrying her somewhere until they had a reason to. The afternoon sun sat directly overhead, and the town of Harrow Creek, Texas, spread out around her in every direction. The feed store, the sheriff's office, the mercantile with its hand-painted signs, the bank on the corner with its brick face turned toward the street. 300 people in this town, give or take. She had tried to speak to most of them in the 2 days she'd been here. Most of them had looked at her the way Roy Hattie had. Some had looked worse. A woman coming out of the mercantile pulled her little boy close when she passed. A man sitting outside the barber shop said something to his friend, and they both laughed without looking at her directly. 2 girls about Mei Lin's own age walked past on the opposite side of the street, and one of them whispered something that made the other one cover her mouth. Mei Lin didn't need to know the exact words. She'd learned to read that particular gesture in every language. She found a patch of shade at the side of the building and sat down against the wall with her knees pulled up and her back straight, because sitting straight was one of the few things she still had control over. She opened her bag. Inside was everything she owned in this country. The dictionary, a change of clothes wrapped in oilcloth, a photograph she didn't look at anymore because looking at it made the grief too heavy to carry and still walk, and a letter written in Chinese that she couldn't bring herself to throw away, even though she knew the man who'd written it was never coming to find her. She had come to America 6 months ago as the bride of a man she had never met. That was the arrangement her father had made. The man's name was Douglas Fenn, and he owned a piece of land in West Texas, and he had sent money to her family in exchange for her passage and her hand. Her father had called it an opportunity. Her mother had cried for 3 nights and then sewn 12 silver coins into the hem of Mei Lin's travel dress and told her to be a good wife and make the family proud. Douglas Fenn had met her at the train station in Abilene. He was older than she'd expected and quieter than she'd hoped, and he'd looked her up and down on the platform with the expression of a man checking livestock at auction. She had smiled anyway. She had been prepared to build something from less than nothing. She had been prepared to work hard and learn fast and make a life out of whatever scraps this new world offered. But Douglas Fenn had died of a stroke 6 weeks after she arrived, and the land had gone to a nephew in Oklahoma who had shown up, looked at Mei Lin, and told her she was not his problem. He had kept the coins from the hem of her dress because he said they were part of the estate. He had given her 2 days to get off the property. That was 5 months ago. She had learned English from strangers and from the dictionary and from listening hard to every word spoken around her. She had worked where work was offered, laundry, cleaning, picking cotton, in a heat that made her feel like she was being cooked from the inside out. She had moved from town to town, staying just ahead of the places where people stopped tolerating her and started doing something about it. She had not written home. She could not bring herself to write home. She sat against the side of Hattie's diner in the shade that was shrinking as the sun shifted, and she tried to think about what to do next. There was a town called Midland, 30 miles east. Maybe Midland would be different. Maybe she could walk it if she started at first light and kept moving. Maybe. She was in the middle of that calculation when she heard boots coming across the gravel, and she braced herself without thinking. That was what weeks of being moved along did to a person. Put a brace in your spine every time boots came toward you. But the boots stopped. And then a man's voice said, without any particular performance in it, "Excuse me, miss, you all right?" She looked up. He was tall, not enormous, but the kind of tall that comes from hard outdoor work and doesn't apologize for itself. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a face that had been weathered down to something spare and honest. Dark eyes under the brim of a hat that had clearly been through everything he had. His shirt was plain. His vest was worn. He held a paper bag from the diner in one hand, and he was looking down at her with his head tilted slightly to one side, the way a person does when they're actually trying to see you rather than categorize you. "I am well," Mei Lin said, which was the sentence she defaulted to when she needed time to read a situation. "Thank you." "You sure?" he said. "Because you were sitting different a minute ago and you don't look well." She studied him for the moment. She had become very good at reading men. It was a survival skill she'd developed out of pure necessity. She looked for the shape of what they wanted before they said it, looked for the thing hiding behind the question. This man was harder to read than most. He didn't seem to want anything obvious. He didn't have the look of Roy Hattie. He didn't have the look of Douglas Fenn's nephew either. "I am tired," she said, which was true in about 15 different ways. He crouched down so he wasn't standing over her. That surprised her enough that she didn't say anything for a moment. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yesterday," she said, which was technically true if she counted the crackers. He looked at the bag in his hand. Then he looked at her. Then he reached into the bag and pulled out a wrapped sandwich and held it out. Mei Lin stared at it. Her stomach made a sound that she was grateful didn't carry. "I've got 2, he said. "Hattie's wife always packs extra. Take it." "I cannot," Mei Lin said, because the reflex to refuse charity was built into her bone-deep, hammered in from both sides of the ocean. "Miss," the man said patiently, "I'm not offering because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering because you look like you need to eat, and I have food. That's the whole of it." She looked at him. She looked at the sandwich. Her hands moved before her pride could stop them. She took the sandwich and she unwrapped it, and she ate it in small deliberate bites, because she knew from hard experience that eating too fast after too long made things worse, not better. He sat down on the wooden step nearby and didn't say anything while she ate. Didn't watch her in that pitying way that felt like being studied, just looked out at the street like he had all the time in the world. When she was done, she folded the paper neatly and held it in her hands. "Thank you," she said. "I will pay back when I have work." "Where are you working?" he asked. "I am looking," she said. "In Harrow Creek." "I try," she said. 2 days I try. No one wants." He turned his hat in his hands once slowly. "Where are you staying?" "I look for place also," she said. She kept her voice steady. She was very good at keeping her voice steady. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something quieter than that. "My name's Caleb Harrow," he said. "I run a ranch about 4 miles outside town. I'm short on help since my hand left last spring." Mei Lin waited. "I can't promise much," he said. "The work is hard and the pay is modest and the house has seen better years. But there's a room with a cot and a lock on the door, and meals come with the work." He paused. "It'd be temporary. Until you get sorted." She studied him for a long time. "Why?" she said. He seemed to have expected that question. "Because Roy Hattie isn't going to hire you," he said. "And neither is anyone else in this town, and I need someone to help me keep the horses and the garden from dying before August ends. That's a practical answer. You want a kinder one, I don't have it right now." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "I work hard," she said. "I figured," he said. "I learn fast." "I imagine so. I not cause trouble, miss," he said, and there was something dry and almost gentle in it. "You look like the last person in Harrow Creek looking to cause trouble." She stood up. She picked up her bag and she settled it on her shoulder, and she looked at him straight on for the first time. "My name is Mei Lin," she said. "I came from Guangdong province. I speak 3 languages, and I can read English better than I can speak it. I can cook and clean, and I am not afraid of hard work or difficult weather. I ask for nothing I have not earned." Caleb Harrow stood up too, and he put his hat back on, and he said, "All right, Mei Lin, my wagon's out front." He walked around the side of the diner, and she followed him. And when they passed Roy Hattie coming out to collect the afternoon delivery, Roy stopped and looked at Caleb with the particular expression of a man who feels an opinion coming on that nobody asked for. "Caleb," Roy said, nodding at him. Then, with a flick of his eyes toward Mei Lin, "You sure about that?" Caleb didn't slow his walk. "Last time I checked," he said, "my hiring decisions weren't a committee matter, Roy." Roy made a sound in his throat, and Caleb kept walking. Mei Lin kept her eyes forward and her chin level, and she thought as she climbed up onto the wagon seat that this was the first moment in 5 months that she had felt the edges of something she couldn't quite name yet. Not safety. She didn't trust safety enough to name it yet. But something adjacent to it. Something that sat in her chest quiet and still like a candle in a window. The 4 miles to the Harrow Ranch passed in near silence. The land spread out in every direction, dry and gold and enormous, the summer heat pressing down from above and radiating back up from the cracked earth. Grasshoppers jumped out of the tire-flattened grass at the sides of the road. A hawk circled something far off. She sat with her bag in her lap and her hands folded on top of it, and she watched the land pass. "You've been in Texas long?" Caleb asked after a while. 5 months, she said. "All in this part?" "I travel," she said. "Many towns." He nodded. "You're a long way from where you started." "Yes," she said. He didn't ask why. She noticed that. He didn't ask the next obvious question, didn't lean in with the curiosity that usually came dressed up as concern. He just nodded and let it rest there, and the silence that came after wasn't uncomfortable. It was just silence. When the ranch came into view, she looked at it carefully. A main house with a covered porch, weathered but structurally sound. A barn in better shape than the house, which told you what a man prioritized. A vegetable garden along the east side that had gone somewhat ragged, but not beyond saving. 3 horses in the paddock. There was a porch light on even in the middle of the afternoon. She noticed it, but didn't ask about it. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down and held a hand up to help her. She climbed down without it, not from pride, but from the particular caution of a woman who had learned the difference between a hand offered in help and a hand that wanted something in return. He didn't make anything of it. "I'll show you the room first," he said. "Then the garden. Then we'll get the evening chores sorted and eat something that isn't a diner sandwich." She followed him inside. The house was plain and clean and very quiet. She felt the quiet the moment she stepped through the door. Not the quiet of emptiness exactly, but the quiet of a place that had been holding its breath for a long time. There were photographs on the mantel, a boy's boots by the door, a child's drawing framed and hung crookedly on the kitchen wall. She didn't say anything about any of it. He showed her a room at the end of the hall. There was a narrow cot with a quilt folded across it, a small table, a window with a curtain that let in the evening light, and a door with a lock just as he'd said. He handed her the key without making anything of it. "Bathroom's next door," he said. "There's water in the pitcher. Supper's at 6. "I will help cook," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. "I work. That is the arrangement." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. 6 then." He left her in the room and she closed the door, and she stood there in the quiet and the late afternoon light, and she pressed the key into her palm so hard it left an impression in her skin. Then she sat down on the cot and she put her bag beside her, and she breathed. Just breathed. Outside the window, the summer wind moved through the dry grass and the horses shifted in the paddock, and somewhere in the distance, one of the windmills groaned and turned. She had not cried since the first week after Douglas Fenn's nephew had put her out. She had made a decision then that crying was something she would do after she was safe, and she had not been safe since. So the crying stayed waiting behind her eyes, like water behind a dam. She didn't cry now either. But the dam shifted just slightly. She unpacked her bag onto the small table. The dictionary, the clothes, the photograph she didn't look at, the letter she couldn't throw away. She set them out with the particular care of a person arranging the only things that proved they existed. Then she smoothed her dress, retied her braid, and went to find the kitchen. Caleb was already in there pulling things from the icebox with the efficient movements of a man who had been cooking for one long enough that it had become automatic. He looked up when she came in. "I can show you where things are," he started. "Tell me what you have," she said, "and I will cook." He told her. She listened, turned to the stove, and went to work. They didn't talk much while she cooked. He sat at the table and drank coffee, and occasionally answered a question about where something was kept, and she moved through the kitchen with the focus of a person who knows exactly how to do this particular thing well. She made rice from the bag she found in the pantry, and cooked it with the efficiency of someone who had made rice 10,000 times before. She found dried peppers and onions, and the end of a smoked ham, and she made something that the kitchen hadn't smelled like in a very long time. When she set a plate in front of him and sat down across the table with her own, he looked at what was in front of him for a moment, and then looked at her. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "My mother," she said. "She teach you American cooking." "She teach me cooking," Mei Lin said. "Food is food." He almost smiled at that. She saw the edge of it before he caught it. They ate. The kitchen was quiet except for the cicadas beginning outside as the sun went down. When Mei Lin finished eating, she cleared the table without being asked and washed the dishes at the basin, while Caleb sat with his coffee and looked at the wall in the way of a man thinking something he wasn't going to say yet. She dried her hands and folded the cloth and turned around and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't categorize. "You can say what you think," she said. "I prefer it." "I think," he said slowly, "that you've been taking care of yourself a long time." "Yes," she said. "And I think," He said that you've been doing it mostly alone. She looked at him. Yes. He nodded slowly, looking back at the wall. I know something about that, he said. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. The kitchen held them both in its quiet, and the cicadas sang outside, and the porch light burned through the evening, the way it always did. And for the first time in 5 months, Mei Lin ate supper at a table and sat in a room that had a lock on the door she'd come from, and a man across from her who had not once asked her for a thing she hadn't offered first. It wasn't safety yet. She wouldn't call it that. But it was the closest thing to it she had touched since she stepped off a train in Abilene, Texas, and discovered that the country you'd been promised and the country you'd arrived in were two very different places. She washed her hands again for no particular reason. She dried them again. And she stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the darkening land and thought, with a cautiousness so deep it barely counted as hope. Maybe. Just maybe. She was already up before the sun. Caleb came downstairs at 5:30 in the morning and found the kitchen clean. The stove lit coffee, boiling on the burner, and Mei Lin standing in the garden with her sleeves rolled up and her hands in the dirt, pulling weeds from between the tomato rows with the focused calm of someone who had been doing this their entire life. He stood on the porch for a moment and watched her work. She moved without wasted motion, one pull, one toss, next row. No hesitation, no looking around to see if anyone was watching. He poured 2 cups of coffee and carried them both outside. She looked up when she heard his boots on the step. He held out a cup without saying anything. She took it, handed it back so she could keep working, then seemed to reconsider and held out her hand for it again. You don't have to start this early, he said. Light is good for working, she said. Heat comes later, better now. He sat on the porch step and drank his own coffee and looked at what she'd already done in the pre-dawn dark. She'd cleared half the east row. The weeds were piled neat beside the fence. Garden's been neglected, he said. It wasn't an accusation, more like an admission. I can see, she said, but not unkindly. It is not too far gone. Another week and maybe yes, but now still okay. I haven't had much time for it. You run ranch alone. Since March, he said. That is too much for one person. I manage. She glanced at him over her shoulder. Managing is not the same as doing well. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said finally. I suppose it isn't. She went back to the weeds. He drank his coffee. The sky turned from black to deep blue to the particular shade of gray that comes right before Texas commits to the heat of the day, and the horses in the paddock began to stir and make their morning sounds. And somewhere out past the far fence, a coyote said its last word of the night and went quiet. The brown mare, Mei Lin said without looking up. She favors her right front leg. Caleb set his cup down. You noticed that. Last night, when I looked out the window, she stands different from the others. He was quiet a beat. She caught a stone 2 weeks ago. I've been watching it. Has she improved? Some. I can look if you want. My father kept horses. He looked at her back while she worked at the way she talked about her father in the past tense, without registering it the way people do when they've long since made their peace with the loss of something and are just reporting facts now. All right, he said, after breakfast. She nodded and pulled another weed. That was how their mornings began. Not with announcement, not with negotiation, but with the accumulation of small practical things. She cooked while he did the early feeding. He handled the horses while she finished the garden. They met in the middle at the kitchen table with food between them and the particular silence of 2 people who have decided without saying so to ask each other only the questions that need answering. On the 3rd morning over eggs and rice she'd made by combining what she had with what was in the pantry in a way that shouldn't have worked, but she looked at the photograph on the mantel and said, "Your family." He looked up from his plate. He looked at the photograph for a moment. "My wife," he said, "and my boy." "They are not here," she said. It was an observation, not a question. "No," he said. She ate. He ate. Then she said, "I am sorry." "It's been 4 years," he said. Like that explained something. 4 years is not a long time, she said. For some things? He looked at her. She was looking at her plate, eating with the concentration of someone choosing not to say more, and he realized with a small jolt that she wasn't offering platitudes. She wasn't filling silence with comfort she didn't mean. She was just stating a fact she believed. No, he said. It isn't. She looked up then briefly and met his eyes, and then looked back down, and that was all. But it landed different than 4 years of other people's condolences had. All of those had wanted something from him, wanted him to reassure them that he was healing, that he was moving on, that their discomfort with his grief was going to be short-lived. Maylin didn't want anything. She'd just told him the truth and let it be the truth. He finished his coffee and pushed back from the table. I'm going into town this morning, he said. Need supplies. You want to come or stay? She thought about Roy Hattie. She thought about the woman who'd pulled her son close. She thought about the 2 girls across the street and the hand over the mouth. I stay, she said. All right. He picked up his hat from the hook. I'll be back before noon. Lock the front door if you want. Keys on the hook. She looked at him. You trust me in your house alone? He put his hat on. You didn't steal anything when you had the chance, he said. That's generally how I decide. She stared at him. He walked out. She heard the wagon start up and move down the road, and then she sat alone in the quiet kitchen and looked at the photograph on the mantel and thought about what a strange thing trust was, how it arrived sometimes without announcement, like a plant that came up in soil you'd forgotten you'd seeded. She washed the dishes. She mopped the kitchen floor. She found a basket of mending by the back door shirts with missing buttons, a pair of work trousers with a torn knee, and she sat on the porch in the heat that was building toward its daily fury, and she mended every piece with her small, careful stitches while the summer pressed down around her. She was halfway through the second shirt when she heard hoofbeats on the road. Not Caleb's wagon. Single horse. Moving fast. She watched the road without moving. A rider came over the rise and slowed when he saw the ranch, and she saw him see her, and she felt the particular tightening in her chest that came before things went wrong. She had learned to trust that tightening. The rider came through the gate without being invited. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with a hat pushed back and the casual carriage of someone who had never once considered that he might not be welcome somewhere. He pulled up 20 feet from the porch and looked at her. Well, he said, you must be the girl Caleb took in. Maylin kept her needle moving through the cloth. I work here, she said. That's one way to put it. He looked her over in a way that was long and deliberate, the way men did when they wanted you to know they were doing it. Name's Curtis Wade. My family's got the ranch adjacent east. I come by sometimes to check on old Caleb. He home. He is in town, she said. Gone long. He will return soon, she said, which she had no way of knowing for certain, but said with the absolute conviction of a woman who needed this man to believe it. Curtis Wade leaned forward on his saddle horn. You speak good English for... He paused, rearranged his face into something that thought it was friendly, for someone new to the area. I learn fast, she said. I'll bet you do. He looked at the mending in her lap, then at the house, then back at her. Seems like Caleb's keeping you busy. I am not kept, she said, and her voice was perfectly level. I work. There is a difference. Something flickered in his expression. He hadn't expected her to answer back that much was plain. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that thought it was charming and wasn't. Didn't mean any offense, he said. None taken, she said in a tone that meant the opposite. He sat there another moment, and she kept sewing, and he seemed to be deciding something. Then he said, You know my mother could probably use someone to help around our place too. If Caleb's not... Caleb's arrangement suits me, she said. Thank you. A beat of silence. You sure about that? He can be... Curtis Wade searched for the word solitary, difficult. I am not afraid of solitary, she said. Or difficult. He studied her for a moment longer, and then he pulled his horse around in a slow circle that was itself a kind of statement, and he said, Well, Tell Caleb I came by," and rode back out the gate. Maylin watched him go. She didn't let her hands shake until he was over the rise and gone, and then she set the mending down and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed until the shaking stopped. She was back to the mending by the time Caleb's wagon came up the road at 11:30. He climbed down with 2 crates of supplies and stopped when he saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing happened," she said. He set the crates down on the porch step and looked at her steadily. He didn't push, didn't press, just waited with the patience of a man who knew how silence worked. She told him about Curtis Wade. His jaw tightened so briefly she might have imagined it. "What did he say exactly?" She repeated it word for word. She had a very precise memory for exact words, particularly when they were words spoken at her by men she didn't trust. Caleb picked up the crates. "He give you any trouble?" "Nothing I could not handle," she said. Then, because she believed in exactness, "But I did not like him." "You have good instincts," Caleb said, and carried the crates inside. She followed him. "You know him well." "Well enough." He set the crates on the kitchen table and started unpacking. "Curtis Wade thinks the land east of my fence line belongs to him because his father told him it does. It doesn't. We've been in a disagreement about it for 2 years. "Land dispute," she said, "among other things." He put flour on the shelf, coffee beside it. "The Wades are the kind of family that's been told they're important long enough that they believe it. Curtis especially." She considered this. "He came to look at me," she said, "not to check on you." Caleb's hands slowed on the supplies. He turned and looked at her. "You think so?" "He heard you had a woman here," she said. "He came to see what kind." A long pause. "I'm sorry he bothered you." "I am not bothered," she said. "I am observing. There is a difference." He almost smiled again, that edge she was beginning to recognize. "You say that a lot." "Because it is often true," she said. She helped him put away the supplies and then went back to the porch and the mending, and he went to check the brown mare's leg, and the afternoon settled back into its rhythm, the way afternoons do when the disruption has passed and everyone involved has decided to continue. But she noticed that when he came back in from the paddock, he latched the main gate. He hadn't done that before. That evening, while the light was going golden and long, and the heat was finally pulling back from the day she was finishing the last of the mending, when she heard him come out to the porch and sit in the chair beside her. They sat without speaking for a while. The summer dark was coming up fast at the edges of the sky, the crickets starting their nightly argument, and the porch light clicked on automatic like a reflex, like his hand knew to reach for it before his mind did. She looked at the light. She looked at him. "Why do you leave it on in the day?" she asked. He was quiet for so long, she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My son used to come home from the south pasture right around this time. He was 12. He always came back just when the light was getting low." He stopped. "I leave it on so I don't have to think about the fact that he isn't coming down that road." She looked at the road, at the last of the light on it. "What was his name?" "Daniel," he said. "Daniel." She repeated carefully the way she repeated words she wanted to keep. "He would have been 16 now," Caleb said. "Good with horses, better with people than I ever was." She held the mended shirt in her lap, and she didn't say anything for a moment, because she knew that some things don't want comfort, they just want to be witnessed. Then she said, "I have a photograph I don't look at." He glanced at her. "My husband," she said. "Not I did not know him. It was an arrangement. But I carry his photograph because I think—" She stopped, looked at her hands, started again. "I think I carry it because if I throw it away, then I am admitting that everything about coming here was a mistake. And I cannot admit that yet." Caleb was quiet. "My mother sewed coins into my dress," she said. "For luck, for safety." His nephew took them. She said it plainly without drama, the way she said most things. "Every single one." "Lord," Caleb said under his breath. "I was very angry," she said. "I am still angry, but I walk anyway." He looked at her for a long time in the way he had the way that was actually looking, not cataloging. "How long have you been walking?" "5 months, she said. "And before that?" "Before that I was on a ship for 6 weeks. She folded the shirt into her lap. "And before that I was a daughter in my father's house, and I thought the world was the size of one province." She paused. "The world is much larger than one province." "It is," he said. "It is also," she said, "much less kind than I was told." He didn't argue with that, didn't offer her the counter-argument about silver linings or God's plan or any of the other things people said when they couldn't tolerate someone else's honest accounting of the world's failures. He just nodded slowly and looked at the road. "No," he said. "It isn't." The light burned on the porch, and the night came up around them, and somewhere past the far fence, the coyotes started their conversation, and the horses went quiet in the paddock, the way horses do when they've decided the world is safe enough for tonight. She finished the mending. She set it on the pile. She picked up the last piece, a child's shirt, small pale blue, with a tear at the elbow, and she held it for a moment and then looked at Caleb, and she saw in his face that he'd forgotten that shirt was in the basket. "I can mend this," she said quietly, "if you want." He looked at the shirt. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to stop this time, and she watched it move, and didn't look away, and didn't pretend she hadn't seen it. "Yeah," he said. His voice came out rough. He cleared it. "Yeah, that'd be thank you." She threaded her needle and started at the elbow seam, and he sat in the chair beside her, and didn't leave, and the porch light held them both in its small circle, and neither of them said another word for a long time. But the silence between them had changed, from the silence of strangers to the silence of people who have exchanged something real and are sitting with the weight of it, which was when the sound of a vehicle on the road brought both of them upright. Not a single rider this time. A truck, moving slow, lights off. Caleb was on his feet before she was, and she saw his hand go to the side of the door, where she knew now he kept his rifle. Not because he'd shown her, but because she'd learned to read the geography of a cautious man's house. And she felt the tightening in her chest again, that specific animal warning sharper now than it had been that afternoon. "Go inside," he said, not looking at her. "Back of the house." "What is it?" she said. The truck slowed to a stop just outside the gate. 3 doors opened. 3 men stepped out, and Maylin recognized one of them before they'd walked 10 feet up the road, recognized him from the shape of him in the dark, the way you recognize something in a nightmare, not because you can see it clearly, but because some part of you already knew it was coming. Her hands stopped being hands. They became something cold and numb and separate from the rest of her. "Caleb," she said. "Go inside, Maylin." "Caleb," she said again, and this time her voice had no steadiness in it at all. "I know them." "Get inside," Caleb said again, and this time his voice had an edge to it that wasn't anger. It was the controlled quiet of a man measuring exactly how much time he had and spending none of it on panic. "No," Maylin said. He turned and looked at her. It was dark enough now that she couldn't read his full expression, but she heard the breath he pulled in through his nose, slow, deliberate. "Maylin." "I know them," she said again. "You do not. That matters." The 3 men were through the gate now, walking up the path with the unhurried confidence of people who had never once arrived somewhere and not gotten what they came for. The one she recognized was in the middle, broader than she remembered. Older. He'd grown a beard since Abilene, but the way he walked, that particular roll of the shoulders that said every space he entered belonged to him by right, that hadn't changed at all. His name was Denton Marsh, and he was the man who had told her very calmly and very clearly 3 months ago in a rooming house outside Abilene that she owed him a debt she had no legal standing to dispute, that the late Douglas Fenn had borrowed money from him before he died, and that the terms of that loan had transferred to her as Fenn's widow, whether she liked it or not. She had run the same night. She had not looked back. She had not run far enough. Marsh stopped about 15 feet from the porch steps. The 2 men with him fanned out slightly to either side, not dramatically, just enough to make the geometry of the situation clear. He looked at Mei Lin. He looked at Caleb. He smiled. "Evening," he said. "Nice night." Caleb said nothing. "Name's Denton Marsh," the man said, easy as anything, like he was introducing himself at a church social. "I have some business with the lady here. Won't take long." "She's not receiving visitors," Caleb said. Marsh tilted his head. "That's so." He looked at Mei Lin. "You want to tell your friend here who I am, sweetheart? Save everybody some time?" "Don't call her that," Caleb said. Marsh's smile didn't change. "Sir, I don't know who you are or what your arrangement is with this woman, but I guarantee you it's less complicated than mine. She owes a debt. Legitimate debt, documented and witnessed. I'm here to collect." "What debt?" Caleb said. "Her late husband's," Marsh said. "I was his creditor. She's his widow. Simple law." "She's not his widow," Caleb said. "She's his widow by an arrangement she didn't choose, and whatever your claim was, it died with him." Marsh studied Caleb for a moment. "You a lawyer?" "No." "Then I'd appreciate it if you'd let the adults handle this." One of the men on the left shifted his weight, and Caleb's hand moved not fast, not theatrical, just absolutely clear in its direction to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. The shift stopped. "I'll say this once," Caleb said. "Whatever you think she owes you, she doesn't owe it here. Get off my land." Marsh was quiet for a moment. Mei Lin watched his face. She knew what was happening behind it. The calculation, the assessment, the weighing of how much this was going to cost against what he stood to gain. She had watched him do it before. In the rooming house, he had done it for less than 2 seconds before deciding she was worth the effort. He did it now for 3. Then he said, "Here's the problem, friend. I've got a bill of debt signed by Douglas Fenn with 2 witnesses who are still breathing, stating that one Mei Lin Fenn, that's her legal name now, in case you didn't know, is liable for a sum of $460 upon his death to be paid in labor or currency. I've been looking for her 3 months. He spread his hands like a man being reasonable. "I'm not an unreasonable person, but I don't leave without something to show for 3 months. $460, Caleb said. "And interest," Marsh said. "Standard." "She never signed anything," Caleb said. "She didn't have to," Marsh said. "That's not how this kind of debt works." Mei Lin stepped forward. Caleb's arm came out sideways, not grabbing her, just creating a line she could choose to stop at, and she stopped at it, but she looked past it directly at Marsh. "Show me the paper," she said. Marsh blinked. Then he smiled wider this time. "She speaks." "Show me the paper," she said again. "The bill of debt. Show me." "I don't carry it on my person." "Because it does not exist," she said. "Douglas Fenn signed nothing. I know this because I was in that house. I saw every paper he kept. I read English, Mr. Marsh. I read it very well. I read your letter when you sent it. I read every word." She took one more step forward. "You came to a widow with nothing and told her she owed a dead man's ghost money to a man with no document. And when I did not pay you, sent men to watch my room." Her voice was completely steady. "I know what you are. And there is no paper." The silence was total. Then one of the men on the right said, "Denton!" "Shut up," Marsh said. The easy manner had gone somewhere else. He was looking at Mei Lin now without the smile, and what was underneath was harder and less patient. "You're a very smart girl," he said. "Too smart for your situation." "My situation," Mei Lin said, "is that I am standing on someone's land with a witness, and you are standing on someone's land at night with no document. I think my situation is better than yours." Marsh took a step forward. Caleb took a step down off the porch, and the rifle came with him, not raised, but no longer leaning, just present. "Last time," Caleb said. "Off my land." Marsh looked at the rifle. He looked at Caleb's face. He was making the calculation again, and Mei Lin watched it happen, and she felt the specific cold fear of not knowing which way it was going to land. It landed wrong. "Take her," Marsh said. The man on the left moved faster than she expected, and she went sideways off the porch step without thinking, not away from him, but toward the gap between him and the second man. Because she had learned in a rooming house outside Abilene that when 3 people come for you, you do not run straight back. She had learned a lot of things in rooming houses. She almost made it. His hand caught her wrist and yanked, and she spun into the side of the porch railing and felt it crack against her shoulder. And then Caleb was off the step and moving, and she heard the rifle stock connect with something that was not a wooden surface, and the man who had her wrist made a sound, and his grip broke. "Run," Caleb said. She ran. Not away from the fight to the barn, because she knew what was in the barn. She had been inventorying this ranch for 3 days, the way a person does when they are always calculating exits and options, and she knew where the tools were, and she knew which door swung fast. She came back out of the barn with the longest-handled shovel she could reach in 30 seconds. The scene she came back to Caleb had one man on the ground and was holding the second by the collar, while Marsh circled wide to the left and reached for something at his back. "Stop," Mei Lin said, and she had the shovel leveled like she meant it because she did. Marsh froze. He looked at her, at this 20-year-old woman in a worn dress holding a shovel in the dark of a Texas summer night with her shoulder already bruising and her eyes absolutely steady, and something passed across his face that was almost respect. Almost. "This is not finished," he said. "It is finished tonight," she said. "And my name is Mei Lin. Not Fen, not sweetheart, Mei Lin." The man on the ground was starting to get up. Caleb put a boot on his back and he went back down. "Get your men," Caleb said to Marsh. "Get in your truck. If I see you on this road again, I will have the sheriff out here so fast you won't have time to invent another piece of paper." Marsh stood very still for another long moment. The calculation was running hard behind his eyes. Then he looked at the man on the ground, at the second man. Caleb was still holding at the rifle, at Mei Lin and the shovel. He did the arithmetic. "Come on," he said to the men, and his voice had the particular flatness of a man swallowing something he plans to spit back out later. They left. The truck started. The lights came on going out and were gone over the rise inside of 2 minutes. Mei Lin stood in the dark with the shovel still in her hands and listened to the engine fade until there was nothing left of it but the crickets and the horses and her own breathing. Then she sat down in the dirt because her legs made that decision without consulting her. Caleb crouched down in front of her. He didn't take the shovel. He let her keep it. "You hurt?" he asked. "My shoulder," she said. "Let me see." "It is fine." Mei Lin. She let him look. His hands were careful. The kind of careful that's practiced, not performed, the kind that comes from having tended to injuries before and knowing the difference between doing it gently and doing it quickly. He pressed along her shoulder blade, and she hissed through her teeth once, and he said, "Not broken. Bruised bad, maybe cracked. We'll know more tomorrow." "It is fine," she said again, because she needed it to be. He sat back on his heels. "Who is he?" She told him. All of it, the rooming house, the letter, the men outside her door the night she'd run. She told it in order, plainly, without softening it, because she was too tired and too shaken to perform composure anymore. She told him about Douglas Fenn's nephew, and the coins, and the months on the road. She told him everything she'd told no one for 5 months because there had been no one to tell. When she was done, Caleb was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. Not accusatory, just asking. "I thought—" She started. She stopped. Tried again. "I thought if you knew you would tell me to go. That I was trouble you did not want." "You're not trouble I don't want," he said. She looked at him. "I brought men with a truck to your gate at night. You came to my gate with nothing and 3 days without food," he said. "And in 4 days you fixed my garden, mended every torn thing in that basket, noticed my horse was lame before I did, and held a shovel steady at a man twice your size in the dark." He paused. "I'll take the truck at the gate." She stared at him. Something happened in her face that she couldn't stop, a kind of unwinding, like a knot that had been pulled so tight for so long that the sudden release of tension was its own kind of pain. "You cannot say things like that," she said, and her voice finally cracked just at the end, just slightly. "Why not?" "Because I will?" She pressed her lips together. "Because I am not ready for someone to say things like that." He didn't say anything else. He stood up and held out his hand, and she took it this time, and he pulled her to her feet, and she kept hold of it for one moment longer than was strictly necessary, before she let go and stepped back. "Come inside," he said. "I need to look at that shoulder in the light." She followed him up the steps. At the door, she stopped and looked back at the road, dark now, empty, nothing moving. Then she looked at the porch light burning steady. "Caleb," she said. He turned. "He will come back," she said. "You know this." "I know it," he said. "He has done this before, to other women. He finds a debt real or invented and he collects it in labor." She looked at him directly. "He does not let them go. Not without more trouble than tonight." Caleb held the door open. His expression had settled into something resolute and quiet, the look of a man who has already made his decision and is just waiting for the world to catch up. "Then we'll be ready," he said. She walked past him into the house. In the kitchen under the lamp, he looked at her shoulder and confirmed it wasn't broken and wrapped it with linen strips from the medical box he kept in the pantry, and she sat on the kitchen stool and watched him work and thought about how strange it was that the most frightening night she'd had in 5 months was also the first night she had not faced something frightening entirely by herself. "You should have told me to run," she said, while he finished the wrapping. "You wouldn't have gone," he said. "No," she admitted. "I know." He tied off the bandage. "I figured a woman who teaches herself English from a dictionary and crosses an ocean alone and walks 400 miles without giving up wasn't going to run when she had somewhere to stand." She looked at the table. "You cannot know that from 3 days. 4, he said. She almost laughed. It came out broken, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table and poured 2 cups of water from the pitcher, and she drank hers, and he drank his, and the house was very quiet around them. Then she said, "He will use the law if he can. He knows people. The sheriff here is a man named Aldous Prine," Caleb said. "He's been the sheriff for 22 years, and he doesn't bend for money because he has enough of it and never wanted more. I've known him since before Daniel was born." He set his cup down. "First thing tomorrow morning, we go see Aldous." Maylin turned the cup in her hands. "And if the law cannot help..." Caleb was quiet for a beat. "Then we figure out what else can." She looked at him across the table. The lamplight sat between them, and outside the night pressed close, and the shoulder ached, and her hands still weren't entirely steady, and the man who had found her in the dirt outside Roy Hattie's diner was looking at her with the calm of someone who had already decided before the question was fully asked that he wasn't going to let this go wrong. She thought about her mother sewing coins into a hem at midnight. She thought about the ocean. She thought about all the miles of cracked Texas highway she'd walked alone. She thought about Daniel's blue shirt mended now and folded on the shelf. "I will not be a burden to you," she said quietly. "Maylin," he said. "I will work hard enough that..." "Maylin." His voice stopped her. "That's not why I'm doing this." She looked at him. Then why? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because 4 years ago, when everything fell apart, I had people who stayed. A neighbor who came by every morning for 6 months without being asked. A man at church who fixed my fence without telling me. People who stayed even when I gave them no reason to." He looked at his cup. "I've been trying to figure out ever since what I owe for that." The kitchen was very still. "You owe it to me," she said carefully. "I owe it forward," he said. "That's how it works." She sat with that for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "In my province we say a kindness given to a stranger returns to the giver from a direction they cannot predict. That sounds about right, he said. She put her cup down. She stood up and straightened and pulled her braid over one shoulder. Then tomorrow we go to the sheriff, she said. And tonight I will check the barn latch if you don't mind. I already did, he said. She stopped. Front gate too, he said. And I'll sit up a while. She looked at him standing there in the lamplight, this worn and careful man with a porch light. He left burning for a boy who wasn't coming down the road anymore, and she felt something she couldn't name settle into place in her chest, like a bone that had been dislocated for a long time, finally finding its socket. I will sit up also, she said. He opened his mouth. I will not argue about it, she said. He closed his mouth. Then, I'll make more coffee. Yes, she said. You will. She went to the back window and looked out at the dark land and the gate and the empty road. And behind her she heard him move to the stove, and the coffee pot clinked and the fire caught, and the house breathed around them both, and somewhere out past the fence, the coyotes called to each other across the summer dark. What neither of them knew yet was that Denton Marsh had not driven back to wherever he'd come from. He had pulled off the road a half-mile east and cut his lights, and the man he'd sent into Harrow Creek that afternoon, the one neither of them had seen, had already been to visit Curtis Wade. And Curtis Wade had been very interested in what he had to say. Caleb was at the sheriff's office by 7 in the morning. Maylin was beside him because he hadn't suggested otherwise, and she hadn't asked permission, and the understanding between them had become efficient enough by now that neither wasted time on negotiations. They'd already settled without speaking. Sheriff Aldous Prine was a man of about 60, with the unhurried manner of someone who had seen enough trouble in 2 decades to know which kind needed running toward and which kind needed sitting down with first. He listened to everything Caleb said. He looked at Mei Lin when Caleb described her shoulder. He asked 3 precise questions and took notes on a pad in the small, cramped handwriting of a careful man. Then he said, Denton Marsh. You know him, Caleb said. Know of him, Prine said. He's worked the eastern counties for a while, debt collecting, the kind that's legal on paper and wrong in practice. He tapped his pen on the pad. The bill of debt claim on a widow without her own signature that won't hold in a proper court. It never has. He knows that, Mei Lin said. Prine looked at her. Go on. He does not use court, she said. He uses pressure. He comes many times. He makes the woman feel she has no choice. He makes her believe the law is on his side even when it is not. He is patient. She paused. He found me after 3 months. He is very patient. Prine wrote something else. I'll send a wire to the Abilene Sheriff's Office today. If there are prior complaints against him, we build a file. If he sets foot in this county again, I'll have grounds. He set his pen down and looked at Caleb. How long is she staying with you? As long as she wants, Caleb said. Prine looked at Mei Lin again, with the evaluating steadiness of a man who assessed situations for a living. Miss, I want to be straight with you. If he has legal documentation, even documentation that's been falsified, a wire from Abilene can take 3 to 5 days. Until I have something in hand, I can't arrest him for showing up on private property and making a claim. I can tell him to leave. That's about the limit. I understand, she said. Caleb, Prine said. You get any sense of where he's staying? He came from the East Road, Caleb said. But I don't know if he's local or driving in. I'll look into it. Prine stood. One more thing. He said it in the tone of a man who has something uncomfortable to add. Curtis Wade came to see me this morning. Before you. The room went still. Caleb's expression didn't change, but Mei Lin saw his hands stop moving on his hat brim. What did he want? He filed a formal complaint, Prine said. Alleges you have an undocumented laborer on your property. Claims she's connected to a known debt dispute and that harboring her constitutes interference with a lawful collection process. He paused. His words, not mine. That's not a crime, Caleb said. No, Prine said. It's not. But it's the kind of complaint that gets written down, and written down complaints make noise even when they don't have teeth. He looked at Mei Lin again. He also claimed that you entered this county without proper documentation of your status as a resident or worker. I am a widow, she said, of an American citizen, Douglas Fenn of Lubbock County. Married 6 months ago in Abilene. I have the marriage certificate. Prine blinked. You have the document with you. I have all my documents, she said. I carry them always. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and laid the folded certificate on his desk. Then the travel papers. Then a copy of the church record of the marriage made by the minister and signed by 2 witnesses. Prine picked them up one at a time and read each one with the focus of a man who meant to remember what he read. When he set them down, he said, "These are in order." "Yes," she said. "I know." He looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. "Curtis Wade is going to be disappointed," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know that too." Caleb put his hat back on and stood. "Aldous, how long before you hear from Abilene?" 3 days if I'm lucky," Prine said. 5 if I'm not. In the meantime, he turned to Mei Lin. You stay on Harrowland, and you don't go anywhere alone. You understand me? Yes, she said. Caleb, Prine said, and he said it in the particular way of a man communicating something beyond the word itself, a kind of endorsement, or a kind of permission. Caleb received it with a single nod. They walked out into the morning heat. On the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, Mei Lin stopped and turned her face up toward the sky for a moment with her eyes closed just briefly. Not in relief exactly, but in the manner of a person taking one clear breath before the next stretch of hard road. Caleb waited. She opened her eyes. "Curtis Wade," she said. "He was angry I did not go with him." "He was surprised you didn't," Caleb said. "There's a difference." "For men like that," she said, "I don't think there is." He didn't argue. They walked back to the wagon. Roy Hattie was standing outside his diner when they passed, and he looked at Mei Lin with the guarded expression of a man reconsidering an earlier assessment. She met his eyes without slowing her step, and he looked away first, and the small private satisfaction of that kept her company all the way home. The next 2 days were the strangest she had lived in months. Not because they were difficult, but because they weren't. They were ordinary, which was its own kind of miracle. She worked the garden. He worked the fence line. They shared meals. They sat on the porch in the evenings and talked about things that had nothing to do with Denton Marsh or Curtis Wade, about her province and the food her mother cooked and the river she grew up near, about the ranch in its better years, and the horse Caleb had raised from a foal that Daniel had named and ridden before he could properly sit a saddle. On the second evening, she asked him about his wife. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Her name was Ruth. She was from Oklahoma originally. She taught school here for 3 years before I convinced her that a rancher was worth her time." "Was she?" Mei Lin asked. "Worth convincing?" The edge of a smile. "Took me a year and a half," he said. "So yes, worth every bit of it." "She sounds like a woman who knew her own mind," Mei Lin said. "She was the most clear-eyed person I ever met," he said. "She saw things about people inside of 5 minutes that most folks took years to figure out." He paused. "She would have liked you." Mei Lin looked at the road. "You cannot know that." "She would have respected the way you handle yourself," he said. "She didn't have much patience for people who fell apart when things got hard. You don't fall apart." "I fall apart," Mei Lin said quietly. "I just do it when no one is watching." He looked at her. She felt it on the side of her face, that particular quality of his attention that was never intrusive but was always entirely present. "That's allowed," he said. "Not when there is still something to do," she said. The third morning the wire came. Caleb brought it back from the telegraph office at 10 in the morning and sat down at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then he slid it across to Mei Lin without a word. She read it. Denton Marsh had 3 prior complaints filed against him in Abilene County. 2 women who had documented his pressure campaign and his false debt claims. Neither had pursued formal charges because by the time they'd had the courage to do so, Marsh had moved on, and they couldn't afford the legal process to follow him. But the complaints existed. They were dated and signed and filed with the county. Aldous Prine had everything he needed to issue a removal order from the county the moment Marsh appeared again. Mei Lin set the wire down. She pressed both palms flat on the table. "It is enough?" she asked. "It's enough," Caleb said. She sat with that. In her experience, things that were enough had a way of becoming not enough at the last moment. She had learned not to trust the word. But she looked at Caleb's face, and it had the steadiness of a man who did not make that claim lightly. "Then it is good," she said. "It's very good," he said. She stood up and went back to the stove and stirred the pot that was on for lunch, because there was still lunch to make and the horses needed water, and the east row of the garden needed attention before the heat peaked. And in her experience, the best response to good news was to keep your hands moving so the good news had time to settle into something you could trust. That afternoon, Curtis Wade came back. She was alone in the garden when she heard the horse, and she straightened and turned, and he was already through the gate riding slow, taking in the ranch with the proprietary air of a man surveying something he's decided is already his. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood in the row and didn't move. He pulled up and looked down at her. "Caleb home." "He will return soon," she said. "You said that last time too." He swung down from the horse without being invited to. She held her ground. He walked toward her and stopped about 6 feet away, just inside the range that was meant to be uncomfortable, but outside the range that was actionable. "Here you went to see the sheriff." "Yes," she said. "Aldous Prine is a friend of Caleb Harrow's," Curtis Wade said. "You know that. Whatever he told you, it's colored by that friendship." "He is also the sheriff," she said, "and my documents are in order." Something shifted in his face. He pushed it away and put the casual confidence back. "Look," he said, and his voice dropped into the register of someone about to be very reasonable. "This doesn't have to be complicated. My mother genuinely needs help at the house. It's a better situation than this." He gestured at the garden at the worn edges of the ranch. "Better pay. Better conditions." "I am not looking for better conditions," she said. "You're looking for stability," he said. "Any sensible person would be. You're in a foreign country. You don't have family here. You're dependent on a man you've known for less than a week." "8 days," she said. He blinked. "What?" "I have known him 8 days," she said. "Not a week. 8 days." She said it like it mattered because it did. "And in 8 days, he has not once asked me for something I did not offer freely. He has not told me what I owe, or what I am, or where I should go. He showed me the lock on the door and gave me the key." She looked at Curtis Wade steadily. "I have met many men in this country. That is unusual." Curtis Wade's jaw tightened. "He's a lonely widower who—" "Do not," she said, and the quiet authority in it stopped him cold. "Say what you are about to say about him. He is not here to answer for himself, and I will not stand in his garden and listen to you diminish him." The silence stretched. "You're making a mistake," Curtis Wade said, and now the reasonable veneer was gone, and what was underneath it was plain, not cruel exactly, but the hard, frustrated anger of someone unused to the word no. "I make many mistakes," she said. "This is not one of them." He stood there another moment. Then he turned and walked back to his horse and mounted without looking at her again. At the gate, he stopped and looked back once, and his expression said something his mouth didn't, and then he was gone. Caleb came back from the south pasture 20 minutes later, and she told him word for word the way she always did. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What do you need?" She thought about it. "I need to know how serious the land dispute is," she said. "The east fence line. You said 2 years. How serious?" He sat down at the table. "His father claims my grandfather's survey was wrong, and the property line sits 40 feet further west than I say it does. If he's right, it takes out part of my water access." He paused. "He's not right, but proving it requires a licensed surveyor and a county hearing, and surveys cost money I've been putting off spending." "Order the survey," she said. He looked at her. It's not cheap. Order it anyway, she said. Curtis Wade came here twice in 8 days, and both times he came when you were not here. He is not interested in the land. He is interested in finding a way to stand in this yard. She met his eyes. The land dispute gives him a reason. Take away the reason. Caleb was very still. Then he said, You think 2 steps ahead. I think the steps that keep me standing, she said. It is the same thing. He ordered the survey the next morning. He sent the request by courier to the county office in Midland. He paid the deposit from money he'd been saving for fence repairs, and he did it without discussion because she was right, and he knew she was right. 4 days later, the surveyor arrived. What he found took the ground out from under Curtis Wade's claim so completely that there wasn't a lawyer in 3 counties who would touch it. The property line sat exactly where Caleb Harrow said it did, confirmed by 2 independent reference points dating back to the original county map of 1887. Not 40 feet in dispute. Not 1 foot. The fence was in the right place and had been for 40 years. Caleb had the county office stamp the new survey and file it the same afternoon. That evening, Prine came by the ranch himself, which he didn't do for just anybody, and sat on the porch and told them that he'd issued the removal notice against Marsh and that Marsh's truck had been spotted heading east out of the county that morning. Is he gone? Maylin asked. For now, Prine said. Men like him don't disappear. But he knows we've got the Abilene files, and he knows this county isn't worth the trouble to him anymore. He looked at her. He'll find someone else. I know, she said quietly. Prine finished his coffee and stood and put his hat on. For what it's worth, miss, he said, you handled yourself well. Not everybody would have. Some people fold when they don't have anybody in their corner. She looked at the porch light burning in the evening. I had someone in my corner, she said. Prine looked at Caleb with an expression that contained a whole conversation's worth of things, neither of them put into words. And then he said good night and walked to his horse and rode back toward town. Caleb and Maylin sat on the porch in the cooling air. The cicadas were working full voice. The horses were quiet. The gate was closed. She had her hands in her lap, and she was looking at the road, and after a long time she said, My shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. Good, he said. The tomatoes in the east row will be ready in 2 weeks, she said. I know, he said. The brown mare is walking even now, she said. Both sides. I noticed, he said. She stopped listing things and just sat. Then she said very quietly, I don't know what comes next. He looked at her in the way he had the full steady attention of a man who was actually listening. What do you want to come next? She was quiet for so long the question nearly finished itself. Then she said, I want to learn, properly, school, English all the way, law maybe, or medicine, something that means the next woman who sits across from a man like Marsh has someone who can tell her what her rights actually are. Caleb turned his coffee cup in his hands. There's a college in Midland, he said. Small. They take working students, evening classes. She looked at him. You know this. I looked into it, he said couple days ago. She stared at him. You looked into it. Seemed like something worth knowing, he said. She turned back to the road. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright, and she pressed her lips together hard until she was sure she had herself in hand. And then she said, You are a very unusual man, Caleb Harrow. So I've been told, he said. Never been sure if it was a compliment. It is, she said. The porch light held them both in its quiet circle, and the summer night came down around the ranch and the road was empty and peaceful in both directions. And inside the house, Daniel's blue shirt hung mended and folded on the shelf. And for the first time since she had crossed an ocean with 12 coins sewn into her hem, and a hope she hadn't let herself name Maylin sat in a place that was beginning to feel in its bones like somewhere she might be allowed to stay. She enrolled on a Tuesday, Caleb drove her to Midland in the wagon and waited outside while she walked into the admissions office of Midland County College with her documents in her hands and her braid over one shoulder, and the particular set to her jaw that he had come to recognize as the face she wore when she was doing something that frightened her and intended to do it anyway. She was inside for 45 minutes. When she came back out, she stood on the steps for a moment and looked at him, and he looked back and she said, "September, evening program. They accepted me." He said, "Good." She said, "They said my English is better than half their current students." He said, "I'm not surprised." She walked to the wagon and climbed up without any help and sat with her enrollment papers in her lap all the way back to Harrow Creek. And she didn't say much else, but she held those papers the way she had held the key to her room that first night, pressed into her palms like something she needed to feel the weight of in order to believe. That evening she wrote a letter home for the first time since she had arrived in America. She sat at the kitchen table after supper with the lamp pulled close, and she wrote for an hour, and Caleb left her to it, and went to the porch with his coffee and the letter he'd been meaning to answer from a neighbor 2 counties over. And when she came out, she had the sealed envelope in her hand, and her eyes were red at the edges, in the careful way of a person who has been crying precisely enough and no more. "I told my mother I am well," she said. "That is not a lie." "No," he said. "It isn't." "I told her I have work and a place, and that I am going to school." She looked at the envelope. "I did not tell her everything. Some things I will tell her when I see her." "You're going back?" he asked, and there was something careful in how he asked it. Not possessive, not alarmed, just careful. Like a man asking a question he had a stake in but was trying not to show. She heard the care in it. She sat down in the chair beside him. "One day," she said, "to visit, to show her that I survived and did not spend the 12 coins on grief." She paused. "She will want to meet the people who were kind to me." He was quiet. "People plural." She looked at him. "Aldous Prine was kind," she said. "He did not have to take my complaint seriously. He did." "Fair enough," Caleb said. "And you," she said simply. He looked at the road. "I gave you a sandwich and a cot." "You gave me the key," she said. "You did not keep a copy." She folded her hands in her lap. "In my experience, that is the whole of what kindness is. Giving someone a lock and not keeping a way in for yourself." He didn't answer right away. The night was soft around them, the heat still carrying the warmth of the day, but without the brutality of afternoon, and the stars were doing what Texas stars did in summer, taking up more sky than seemed strictly necessary, as if to remind everyone below that the world was very large and most things that felt insurmountable from down here were not actually visible from up there. "Ruth used to say," Caleb said slowly, "that a home isn't built from lumber. It's built from people deciding to stay." He looked at the porch light. "She said that a lot. I didn't fully understand it until after she was gone, and I was still here, and the house felt like a shell instead of a home." Mei Lin looked at the light too. "And now?" she asked. He took a long time with it. "Now," he said, "it's starting to feel like the other thing again." She nodded once. She didn't push at it. She let it be what it was, which was the truest and most fragile kind of thing an admission offered without conditions, just laid down between 2 people and left there to be received or set aside. She received it. September came, and with it the beginning of everything that came after. She studied in the evenings and worked the ranch during the day, and she was the oldest student in her class and the most foreign, and she corrected the professor on a point of English grammar in the 3rd week by citing page number and paragraph in the dictionary she still carried everywhere, and he looked at her over his spectacles and said, "Miss, you are going to be either my best student or my greatest challenge." And she said, "Both." "I think." And the class laughed, and she sat down, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a classroom since she was a girl in Guangdong province, the particular electricity of being exactly where you are supposed to be. Caleb drove her to class on the nights the weather was bad, and she drove herself on the nights it wasn't, and neither of them made a formal arrangement of it. the way they didn't make formal arrangements of most things. It simply accumulated, like the habit of leaving coffee on the stove at 5:30, like the habit of sitting on the porch in the evenings, like the habit of her putting 2 cups down at breakfast, without thinking about whether there would be someone to fill the second one. In October, she received a letter back from her mother. She read it at the kitchen table, and Caleb was there, and he didn't pretend not to notice her reading it, but he also didn't ask. When she folded it and set it down, her face had done something complicated that she hadn't yet had time to smooth back to neutral. "She is glad I am well," Maylin said. "Good," he said. "She says my father sends his apology." She said it carefully, like the words had sharp edges. "For the arrangement with Fen." Caleb set his cup down. "She says he did not know," Maylin said. "That Fen was old and sick. He thought he was sending me to a life." She was quiet. "I believe her. About not knowing." A pause. "I am less sure about him." "Do you want to be sure?" Caleb asked. She thought about it honestly. "Not yet," she said. "Maybe later. When I have built enough here that the answer either way doesn't change the foundation." He nodded slowly. "That's a wise way to put it." "I have a very good dictionary," she said. He laughed a real laugh. Not the edge of one, not almost, but the full sound of it coming up out of somewhere. It had been stored a long time. She looked at him, and something lit in her own face in response, involuntary and warm, and the kitchen held them both in it for a moment, before the sound faded back into the ordinary afternoon. It was the first time she had heard him laugh like that. She decided she would find reasons to produce it again. November brought the first cold front, which was nothing like a Guangdong winter, but had its own particular personality, a dry chill that came in fast from the north and turned the morning air sharp, and made the horses restless, and knocked the last of the summer out of the garden in a single night. She covered the remaining tomato plants the evening before the front came through because she'd listened to the old-timer at the feed store describe how the weather moved in this part of Texas, and she'd filed it away the way she filed everything she heard that might be useful. Caleb came out in the morning and saw the covered plants and stood looking at them for a moment. He came inside and said, "You covered the garden?" "Yes," she said. "I didn't tell you to." "No," she said. "You didn't." He poured his coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the covered rows. "3 of those plants would have been done if you hadn't," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I covered them." He turned around and looked at her with an expression she had been watching develop over the past 2 months, quiet and unguarded and clear, in a way his face wasn't always clear, the look of a man whose walls had been coming down so gradually that he hadn't noticed until he was already standing in the open. "Mei Lin," he said. "Yes," she said, though he hadn't asked a question yet. He looked at his cup. "I need to say something, and I'm not sure I have the right words for it." "You usually do," she said. "Try." He set the cup down. He looked at her directly. "When I drove past Roy Hattie's diner 2 months ago and saw you in the gravel, I thought—" He stopped. Started again. "I thought I was just a man with an extra sandwich. That's all I thought I was." She waited. "I was wrong," he said. "I think you came and put this house back together. I think you did it so quietly and so practically that I didn't notice it happening. And I think—" He pressed his lips together briefly. "I think Ruth was right about what a home is made of. And I think I'd like you to know that. Whatever you decide to do from here, whatever you build, I'd like you to know that you already built something here." The kitchen was very quiet. Then Maylin said, "I covered your garden because this is my garden too." He looked at her. "I milk your horses because they are my horses too," she said. "I cook in this kitchen because it is my kitchen. I sit on your porch because—" She paused. "Because it is not only your porch." She held his gaze. "I did not ask for this. I did not expect it. But I am not a woman who pretends she does not see what is in front of her." "No," he said. "You're not." "I would like to stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. I have options now. I have papers and a school, and enough English to find work in any county in this state. She said that part deliberately. The way she said things she needed him to understand were true. I would like to stay, because this is where I want to be. Caleb Harrow crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he took both her hands in his, and he held them, the way a man holds something he's been afraid to reach for, and has finally decided the fear is the smaller thing, and he said very quietly, "Then stay." She looked at their hands. She looked at his face. And then she said, "I will need a better room. The cot is not comfortable." He blinked. "The guest room," she said. "The one you repaired. It has a proper bed." He stared at her for a moment, and then the laugh came again, the full real sound of it, and she felt it go through the kitchen and out into the house and into the walls of the place. And she thought that was exactly the right way to fill a house that had been hollow for too long. That winter, she moved into the guest room with the proper bed. That winter, she passed her first semester at Midland County College with the highest marks in 2 of her 3 courses. That winter, Caleb Harrow repaired the porch railing she had crashed into the night of Denton Marsh, and when he finished, he asked her to come look at it, and she ran her hand along the new wood and said it was good work. And he said he had an excellent foreman who kept the standards high. She called herself his foreman for the rest of that year, and it made him smile every single time. The following spring, on an evening when the land was greening up and the horses were restless with the good energy of warm weather coming back, Caleb Harrow asked Mei Lin a question on the porch that was not about work or school or the garden or the law. She said yes before he finished asking. She said it in English first, and then she said it in Cantonese, because there were some things she wanted to say in the language her mother had taught her, and yes was one of them. The wedding was small. Aldous Prine stood up for Caleb. A woman from Mei Lin's college class stood up for her. Roy Hattie catered it because Roy Hattie had decided sometime in the previous winter that he had misjudged the situation and found small ways to correct that without ever saying so directly, which Mei Lin respected as a form of apology that cost a person something real. Years passed, the way years do, in a place where the seasons have personality, not quickly, not slowly, but with the accumulating richness of a life that keeps producing things worth keeping. Mei Lin finished college. She began work with the county as an advocate for immigrant families navigating debt and documentation, disputes the particular kind of legal and institutional maze that men like Denton Marsh built their operations around. She was very good at it. She was, as her professor had predicted in the 3rd week, both his best student and his greatest challenge, and she carried both distinctions without apology. Caleb expanded the ranch by 12 acres, the land he'd been able to purchase once the East Fence dispute was permanently settled, and Curtis Wade's family sold their adjacent property to someone who had no interest in manufactured grievances. He hired 2 full-time hands and a cook, and the cook was a woman from San Antonio, who had heard through several degrees of connection that the Harrow Ranch treated its workers like people rather than inventory, and she arrived with her teenage daughter and stayed for 11 years. The porch light stayed on. Mei Lin never asked Caleb to take it down, and he never offered to. She understood by now what it was, not grief exactly. Not anymore. But the refusal to pretend that Daniel had never lit those steps coming home in the low light of a summer evening. He had. He deserved to be remembered that specifically and that faithfully. And so the light burned, and it became over time as natural a feature of the ranch as the windmill and the paddock and the kitchen table, with its particular arrangement of lamp and chairs. One afternoon in the summer, many years after a 20-year-old woman had put her knees in the dirt outside a roadside diner, and a man had crouched down to her level and asked when she had last eaten, a young woman appeared at the gate of the Harrow Ranch with a backpack and worn shoes, and the particular stillness of someone who had been on the road a long time and had run out of forward. Mei Lin was in the garden. She looked up when she heard the gate. She read the woman at the gate the way she had learned to read all the things that mattered, not from the outside in, but from the stillness from the hands, from the way someone stood when they had nowhere left to be. She walked to the gate and opened it. "Come in," she said. The woman looked at her. She looked at the house. She didn't move yet. I don't want to be trouble," she said. "You are not trouble," Mei Lin said. You are hungry and tired. Come in." "I can work," the woman said quickly. "I can clean. I can—" "Yes," Maylin said. "Later. Right now, you come inside and you eat, and then we will figure out the rest." She held the gate open. "That is how this works." The woman came through. In the kitchen, Caleb looked up from the table when they came in, and he read the situation in the same way Mei Lin had, and he stood up and said, "Sit down, miss. Coffee." Mei Lin set a plate in front of their guest and sat across from her, and folded her hands on the table, and waited while the woman ate, and she did not push or press or ask the questions that could wait, because she knew exactly how much a person needed to just eat first, and breathe first, and feel the lock on the door, before they could say a single useful thing about where they had come from, or what had happened, or what they needed next. She knew because someone had known it for her. The porch light came on that evening, as it always did, and the three of them sat after supper with the summer dark coming up around the ranch, and the woman told them a little of her story, haltingly at first. Then, with more steadiness as she heard herself say it aloud to people who did not flinch. And Mei Lin listened with the full and practiced attention of a woman who had spent years learning that the first thing a person needs is not advice or answers or even help. The first thing a person needs is to be heard. Outside, the land stretched out in every direction under a sky so large it made every human trouble feel temporary, and every human kindness feel permanent. And the Harrow Ranch sat in the middle of it, with its repaired fences, and its even walking mare, and its garden full of things that came back every year, no matter what the winter had done, and the porch light that never went out, and the table that always had room. Mei Lin had arrived in Texas with $3 and a battered dictionary, and a grief she wasn't ready to name, and she had found here, in the least likely soil, the most unlikely home. She had not been lucky. She had been determined, and she had been seen, and she had stayed, and it turned out that those three things done together were enough to build a life from. They always had been. They always would be.